This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Jodi Rose Gonzales. And we're going to talk today about creative freedom, unlocking inspiration through art based mindfulness. And
Mhm.
want to welcome you to the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you so much. And hello to your audience. Good evening.
Well, thank you. And before we get to the heart of your story, I always ask a couple questions of every guest,
Mhm.
like what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Thank you. Well, it's a great question. I think that creativity is our birthright. Um, and we'll get into that, but I think there's three main points: that creativity is your birthright, that transformation is possible, and that life is art. And then add to that, I believe that we're all on a hero's journey. So I just feel like, having been through, I think, many little miniature heroes' journey, the big one, which is about art-based mindfulness. That's a method that I developed, and that's my offering to the world because I believe very much in service orientation. And the methods that I have to share are simple and accessible to every type of creative. And so I just believe that it's work that needs to remind people of what creativity means for them in their lives.
Yeah, being a creative myself, and this podcast was kind of started to deal with creatives that didn't have a space to talk. And this is what we've been doing over the years. And you're a visual artist, you're an art therapist, author, and a mindfulness coach.
Yeah.
And I've kind of since 2016 we've talked to a lot of artists, a lot of creators,
Hmm.
and in that space, I've always felt like the art that creatives do is very cathartic. Um,
Hmm.
like I've been playing music since I'm 57. I've been playing music since I was like 7,
Yeah.
and I didn't do it to make money. I just kind of I sit at my piano just because it helps me work through things. And then if it
Hmm.
happens to make somebody happy, that's cool. But I was gonna write it anyway.
Right.
You know? So it's I think sometimes people get mixed up in terms of like yeah, I knew a lot of people that stopped doing the art that they love because they didn't make it like with the number of likes or views or monetarily, but maybe they lost sight of it. It's like you did it because it was fun because you loved it, but maybe you lost sight of that.
Yeah. I work with so many recovering creatives who have trauma or have creative traumas or who have talked themselves out of their creativity. And I like to remind people that creativity is our language as children. It's a normal part of our developmental process. We think through images and sound and movement and imagination, like the 5 year old to 10-year-old level. That's just where our brains are at. It's how we play, it's how we learn to communicate. So I find that when people reconnect with that, it is really a powerful and joyful experience for them. And they go, oh, yeah, maybe I am a creative after all. And that's just a lot of fun for me to help people be reminded.
Yeah, I think a lot of times during the pandemic, people started leaning back into their childhood curiosity and abandon.
Yeah.
Like I always kind of point out, like I'm a mountain biker and I love bicycles, but like
Mhm.
when I was a little kid, it's like I didn't care about what anybody thought about when I wanted to learn how to ride a bike, and I fell off of it so many times. I
Right.
think a lot of people like if you never rode a bike as a kid and you try to learn
Hmm.
as an adult, it's very hard to get do what you did as a kid. That falling off the bike, you too concerned about what people think about that.
Hmm.
Instead of just having that kid would just go do jump on the skateboard and not think about, oh, I'm gonna probably fall off of it, but like you just keep on doing
Right.
it. I think it's like you just have to find that kind of fun. That as a kid, that you did things because it was fun. Nobody told you couldn't do it,
Hmm.
unless your parents told you you shouldn't do it. But a
Yeah.
lot of times you went to experiment and explore. That adult kind of you take too much, left right brain. You take all the fun out of it because you talk yourself out of it.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot of reasons why we do that. I know our topic tonight is about creative freedom, and I have a little mini course of the same title. And it's like there are 8 essential keys, and playfulness is one of them. And I mean, I just have all these stories of creatives that, even with a prompt of being playful, people tend to take that too seriously. And I was guiding a retreat earlier this year, And so I gave the prompt for the retreat, and I reminded people to be playful. And it was like everyone just froze. And then they started taking like, well, how do I be playful? And overthinking that. And it's like, and you're laughing, like you can relate to that. We really, as adults, operate up here in our front brain, getting our tasks completed and planning and being strategic and doing all the things and just adulting in general. And sometimes we have to let go and unlearn that and, give ourselves permission to be a little silly and to bring the play back into it. And it is incredibly refreshing when we do.
There's one book I was interested in, your that book where you have I think it's like about the dueling.
Yeah, yeah.
What is it? Doodles code.
Yeah, it's called the Doodles Code, and it introduces one technique that I use in all of my master classes and basically all of my online courses as well. And so there's kind of a couple of parts to it. First of all, I talk a little bit about the mechanics underneath the process, but essentially, in art therapy, we recognize that. So I'm part art therapist. So you mentioned that at the beginning, but just in addition to being a visual artist, I'm also an art therapist. And in art therapy, we recognize that images, our creativity comes from a part of our mind that is more intuitive and symbolic. And so if we create doodles, like if we set an intention about a topic we want to explore or a feeling we want to express, we set that intention and then put it aside and then create the first image that comes to mind without editing. And it doesn't matter how raw it is. It could be just a scribble. It could be a stick figure, but it carries a message. It's tied to that intention. And so it comes from the midbrain area, meaning a couple of things. Like it hasn't worked its way up to the front part, our adulting brain, meaning like our adulting brain hasn't told us that it's stupid or not, the meaning isn't stupid or significant or the quality of the drawing or whatever. So we sometimes we say that about the solutions that arrive with these doodles. And so then the other thing is that because it's in the midbrain and symbolic, it might carry information that it just hasn't surfaced for us yet.
There's like
So
a lot of like a lot, like people
yeah.
say 95% of your brain is running subconscious in the subconscious.
Yep.
And what I find with a lot of artists is we can kind of tap into that because
Right.
we've given ourselves a permission structure where we say it's okay
Right.
to tap into
Exactly.
it, right?
And we honor that context within the image, whether we understand it or not. So in the Doodles Code, I share a specific technique called dialoguing. So in art therapy, we process the images. We talk about what it means and why and what are the known symbolic references. But there can be a lot of more subtle information. And it's usually not stuff that's like so out there that we never thought of it before. But either it's just it's so quiet, it's like a whisper that we're too busy to hear it, or it's just overly simplistic. So our thinking mind is like, well, we're going
Yeah.
to make it way more sophisticated than it needs to be. So it's just a refreshing little practice that's great for a daily art journal practice. It can take as little as 5 minutes. And so in the book, again, I introduced the mechanics of this, a couple of little case studies. You can read the book in like 35 minutes. It goes through the first art prompt, which is themed creative breakthrough. And then it offers 8 days of art prompts just to help people get familiar with the practice, because there's actually 4 steps to this little practice: intention setting, doing the image, doing the dialoguing with the image, and then following through. Because we have to remember that whatever our image tells us is specific actions. It's one thing to say, oh, that's familiar, that's nice. And then we move on with our day, not listening to ourselves. And what I love to remind people is that this isn't your image talking, because I know that sounds kind of out there, but that image is the expression of a wisdom that's inside of you. And so the artwork is simply the bridge towards building your awareness of the knowledge that you already hold. So when you start to really honor what the image shares with you and take action in your life in these simple and subtle ways, things just start to shift. It just does.
Yeah.
So those are the 4 steps. And then the rest of the book is just journal to, encourage people to keep up with the practice. So it's a good one.
Right.
It's a powerful practice. Very simple, but powerful when done with consistency. And that's just only that's one of two directions that I teach in art-based mindfulness is being able to decipher the code of the artwork. So that's all about building self-awareness and insight. But the other side is all about calling up the body's rest and digest. So calming the body, quieting the mind. We can use materials and techniques to do that. So things that are that involve both sides of the body or that are repetitive things that, I mean, you mentioned music or even like movement, doing nature-based stuff in the woods. There are just so many different types of activities that are creative that just like bring the stress level down. So
Yeah.
in addition to the self-discovery work, we can manage our nervous systems all in one practice, which is amazing. I just think that's fantastic. We like efficiency here at my studio.
I think it's real important for people to realize, like, I think every human being is creative, and
Hmm.
creatives kind of set a bar where some people think like, well, if I can't draw like, Michelangelo, if I can't be like that, I can't, if I can't be Dylan, or if I can't be Beyonce, if I can't be Taylor Swift, then I can't do it.
Hmm.
Right. But that to me have always been more of like, yeah, the punk aesthetic was this idea that you didn't have to have a perfect voice, to be in the
Hmm.
Clash,
Yeah.
or to be in the Ramones. It's like you had to have a feeling. You go
Yeah.
out, and the punk aesthetic and the grunge aesthetic allowed it. So if you have heart, you could go out and do it. And you didn't have to be perfect. You didn't have to be Jimmy Page. You didn't have to be Hendrix.
Yeah.
And the idea of music to me, I love the kind of flow state in the
Hmm.
moment. There's
Hmm.
no bad note. There's an opportunity, and that's kind of
Right.
like a
Yeah. Yeah.
fusion jazz. And
Right.
jazz musicians are just as are at like a classical level of talent in
Right.
terms of their mastery of their instrument.
And
But
they
what
can pick up a note, right, and run.
they just run with it. But the idea is like there's no bad note. There's an opportunity. Is
Right.
is that I don't have to be a slave to like Bach or Chopin or Beethoven. I don't have to have every note be with what the master wrote. I could actually write something
Mhm.
in the moment, and that's
Yeah.
like a paintbrush moment. That like if I
Right.
once I put that on the canvas, it's on the canvas. If I put that out in
Yeah.
the world, it's a sound canvas. It's out there, and it might
Yeah.
change the next time I do it, but that's okay.
Right. 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 I notice with, I love that you're bringing in the angle of the musician. Um, what I notice with the visual artists that I work with at all levels, whether that's a youth or a professional artist or someone who's just creatively curious, is that how they roll, how we roll, how I roll in creativity is often how I roll in life. And that's another mindfulness aspect. So the self-talk, the comparison piece, the person who thinks that their work is not good enough, do they believe that I am not good enough?
Mhm.
For people who think that my work isn't worthy to sell, am I worthy to put myself out there in the world? And so these are very powerful parallels. And it's not for everyone, it's not 100% like one ratio of
Yeah,
that. But I think that the more that I work with people, I observe that. And so when I hear language like that, we start just by noticing like, you're being really hard on your artwork. Let's
yeah,
talk about how hard you are on yourself. Where does that come from? Is that externally? Because we creatives have a lot of enculturated limiting beliefs that are put on us by society, the most obvious being like the stigma of the starving artist. But then we have our own inner critics as well. So starting, we can pull apart like, where do these internal narratives come from? Are they internal or external? Now you're grinning largely. What are you thinking? What's your
Oh, well,
response?
I think a lot of times artists do put that kind of wall, and then you think about it like a painter, and you go to their loft, they got like 100 paintings, and you ask them, are any of these in the gallery? And they're not ready,
Hmm.
right? You look at
Right.
them and like, they look ready to me, but they in that
Yeah.
painter's mind, they're not ready. And
Right.
I find that with musicians too, they'll have like tons of songs in
Hmm.
their back catalog, and like, and they're scared to show you the ones that are really them. Like they'll show you what they
Right.
can mimic. Like a lot of
Yeah.
times a musician will show me that they can mimic whatever's in the top 10, was in the top 20, or some famous song, they can do it. But I
Right.
would, as a producer, I'm more interested in the song you don't want to show me, the song
Yeah.
you're scared to show me, because I think that that's the song that actually is going to really connect, because that's you. Because
The
that's
originality, the authenticity, the essence of the artist, for
and
sure.
that's always what's hard. Like the producers and editors and recording engineers, they try to bring out that stuff from the artist. They try to get
Mhm,
them to kind of boost their ego and say, "Hey, that is a good riff.
mhm.
That is a good intro. That
Yeah,
is a good." You have to sometimes you'd be surprised how much you have to encourage, because if you do the opposite, then they'll just drop it. They tell them
mhm.
it's like that's garbage, and it's like, "Oh, okay."
Right, yeah.
Like, so you find that you have to, play with in the ego, of people, and their limitations, or their the damage that they've had in their life. A
Right.
lot of times famous artists, they just struggle, and you'd be just so surprised. Like Hendrix was known as a great guitarist, but he was very fearful of his voice, to the
I
degree
didn't
that
know that.
anytime he recorded, he had like a shroud put up so people couldn't see him actually singing.
Oh,
He was not
wow.
he was not comfortable with his singing voice. He's very confident about his guitar playing,
Mhm.
but not
Hmm.
very confident about his voice. And there was a kind of this battle that might have ended up with him, passing away, because of this thing of him not feeling that the voice was as good as the guitar. So even in
Mm,
a guy that's a world class guitar player, he had this thing hanging over him where he wasn't fully confident. And you find that with different artists, like different aspects that sometimes.
mhm, mhm. That's fascinating. I did not know that about him.
Yeah, well, I'm a big I kind of a history guy on when it comes to musicians. I always try to
Okay.
find the thing about them that's interesting. But yeah, I just think that kind of shows you, like, wow, that they might have this stage self that looks overly confident and very audacious, but then you find
Mhm.
out that they're actually not that's not exactly who they are.
Right, right. And I suppose we all do that on different levels. We pull from our strengths and then suffer. I think that's fascinating in recording, to have the cover there, to have that veil, to be able to show up, like to have that be enough, of a comfort zone. Um, that's a really cool fact. I appreciate learning that. Thank you.
A lot of times people will put up like the mask. You have this
Mhm.
like ideas of the mask or the stage self.
Right,
Or,
right.
Bowie was very famous for having these stage selves.
And the
Like,
the whole alter ego piece as well.
yeah, and then being like I heard they when he did Ziggy Stardust, he actually stayed in Ziggy Stardust like a method actor. When he came off stage, he wouldn't get out of the Ziggy character.
Mhm.
During the height of the Ziggy phase, he would stay as Ziggy in his regular life. And
Mm.
people were like, "What are you doing?" But he was kind of playing it like a method actor. He was like in it. And then when he stopped being Ziggy, then he stopped doing that. He changed to a different persona. He didn't always like carry it all the way through, but in some cases, like that's some artists do that. They that's how
So
they find their path.
So, fun fact, I did that when I started graduate school for art therapy. So, I'd been a jewelry designer for years, and I had incredible fear of putting myself out there in the world. I was in a couple of really uh, well known galleries regionally, and very successful with that. I had received numerous grant awards, different awards and accolades. And on the outside, I looked like a successful artist, but on the inside, I was a mess. And so it's like my inner world and outer world were not in alignment. And at
Mhm.
a certain point, I just kind of put everything aside, decided to go to grad school for art therapy. And at that time developed an alter ego named Cowgirl Rose. And I had moved to finish my thesis. I had moved to the outside of the Nashville area, between Nashville and Memphis, to stay with a friend and to just finish up school. And so I had like this whole narrative around Cowgirl Rose, and I designed belt buckles, and I did commission work for musicians out of Nashville. And like, long story short, like, it was not authentic. I was now making work that I thought would sell. It wasn't like really my work. It was like my success as a visual artist just started to go it's just started to tank. But alongside that, it was like the economy in 2006, the recession. There wasn't money
Mhm.
in silver jewelry anymore, so all this stuff was happening, and it was certainly shifting for me as well, as my own persona, my own identity was shifting as I was starting to move into my hero's journey and the healing journey to begin with. So things were just not really going well. I was not feeling so great in Middle Tennessee. I had this incredible character named Cowgirl Rose. That was my jewelry label. And I loved her. And she had so much joy. She was like this Old West character. She had a silver horse named Cloudburst. And so one day, on a particularly just stressful, terrible time, I decided to go horseback riding at the local state park. And I'm riding on this like horse, this like plodding trail horse. And I had this thought, like, why am I not living my life like this alter ego character? Where did I lose my free spirit? Like, why, so I decided to just like really step into that persona. And that started, so like after that trail ride, I wandered into the woods, and I had in my backpack, for reasons unknown, except for this was apparently part of my journey, a catalog for Kripalu, which Kripalu is the North America's largest yoga retreat
Mm.
center. And I'd wanted to go there forever. It's in Massachusetts, but I always felt like I wasn't quite spiritual enough, or not yoga-y enough, or not fit enough. Like, again, the whole not enough thing. But I decided, having embraced, like, I am now going to be the Cowgirl Rose persona. I'm just going to do it. So I called from the middle of the forest and signed up for a retreat. And that launched this whole new journey. I ended up going to Kripalu. I ended up going back and staying for months as a volunteer, and doing selfless service and doing this depth study of yoga with all these incredible thought leaders. And at that point, I was finishing up with graduate school. And that hugely informed art-based mindfulness as I teach it today. But it did start with this alter ego persona that you were
Is that how you
talking about.
got to that drawn to yoga book? Is that how that became?
Well, I've been a yoga teacher and a practitioner of yoga for a really long time. So after doing some more intensive study while I was living in Tucson a few years ago, one of my instructors asked of our group, what do we want to contribute to the field of Hatha yoga? And I had always wanted to combine art and yoga in a unique way. And so that was, again, the early origins of art-based mindfulness as I teach it now. It's simply bringing the doodles code together with a yoga practice where we do an image before yoga, and then we do yoga to really get in the body, to calm and quiet the body. And then we do an image after that. And it's fascinating. Like, I taught this all over at the VA hospital, at the yoga festival, in residential treatment, like in all these places outside of the traditional yoga studio, and everywhere. The second image shifts, and it's so powerful. Like, it's more positive. And it's so powerful that we see, even after doing like a 10-minute gentle chair yoga, how much your demeanor, your outlook can shift. I remember teaching to a group of individuals who had HIV, AIDS, and cancer, and like their world felt very out of control, like they had very little power of choice. But when they saw through their artwork that the shifts, with the intention of just doing 10 minutes of something physical, of just doing some breathing, the shifts in mindset and how positive an outlook they could become, like, it just blew their minds, and it felt like they did have a choice. So that's really where that book came from. As I furthered my study of yoga, I really started to get into yoga philosophy's idea of the mind body being connected. So in Western science, they're separate. Like, you don't go, when you go to the doctor's office, there's the map of the skeleton and the, whatever else. When you go to the therapist's office, there might be a little chart with mood pictures, but there's not a picture that brings it together.
No synergy
Yeah.
of it
Yeah,
together.
yeah. And yoga has a beautiful model called the koshas. So I layered that with Western science, trauma-informed neuroscience. They actually, there are some models that layer together really beautifully. And essentially, art-based mindfulness is intention, like using creative processes, as I mentioned before, to call up the body's rest and digest, to feel calmer, and then so that's, we call that like a bottom up, like low back brain, bottom up way of working with art, or top down, which is the insight self-awareness stuff. So yeah, the book Drawn to Yoga is wonderful to use alongside any type of yoga practice. And so it's more of an embodied practice. So you don't need to be like a yoga master. You can do like a 10-minute chair yoga and get the benefit of that practice. So it brings the yoga doodles up just a notch because you're combining the embodied practice instead of just like brain dumping, your doodle, whatever mood you're in. I call them mood doodles now, actually. In the book, they're called wonder doodles. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of cheesy. So now it's just mood doodles because that's a little more straightforward as to what it is.
Well, I think it's interesting about the Eastern philosophy because I actually lived in Japan for 2 years,
Oh,
from
wow.
2004 to 2006. And what I found was I love the synergy of what was going on in Tokyo. I could see people during the day doing Tai Chi and meditation in these little kind of
Yeah.
nature pastoral areas, like these little parks in the middle of
Right.
Tokyo. And then at the same time, I'm working with the salaryman and there's really advanced technology. But
Uh-huh.
then there's like, there's this Shintoism around
Mm-hmm.
Tokyo. You can find like Shinto kind of relics of that kind of
Right.
ancient world in the middle of the modern world. And
Yeah.
then there's like appreciating of art and going to the theater, just seeing a lot of different things. And my daughter was like taught like the Shintoism and a lot of the Japanese drum style taiko.
Mm-hmm.
And
Cool.
even to this day, as an artist, she's an artist, and all of her work is like informed from like a Shintoism. It's kind of like Eastern Japanese
Mm-hmm.
structure to her work, which was like because that's where she learned her first schooling in like preschool and kindergarten in Japan
Wow,
compared
that's
to like the
fantastic.
Western dynamic, and it was able to see that difference with my daughter versus like my education was all like Western,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and it's like from the start she has this Eastern, so she came out with a different mindset.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sure. And then there's like this entire like nature-based perspective that
Yeah,
infuses that as well. Yes. Yeah.
I
So
think
I
it's really
know
interesting that with
you're,
the fusion you have with what you're talking about.
Mhm. Yeah. So I noticed from listening to your previous episodes that you're fairly nature based, and so you do just as I do this balance of like you've got the right brain left brain thing going on with the IT tech and music, and yeah, I have like my business and all the strategy. I love that balanced with the creative side, but then underneath that there's this connection with nature. How do you think is that like something that helps inform the balance between the two, or how
Yeah,
would
well,
you
the
answer that?
nature for me, it was always like it's because I'm so into tech. Tech is
Mhm.
my day job,
Right.
and the problem with tech is sometimes you'll be so you'll sit there 12 hours at the thing just in a code based highly technical world,
Right.
right? Just locked into that. And I found it's like I need to get out and mountain bike or hike or snowshoe
Mhm.
just to get away from that because it gives you perspective. Like you need that perspective to because I think some people why in my industry they don't have that perspective. They get locked into thinking I'm just going to stay in the cube and this they don't realize to me that there's a diminishing return by
Mm,
being disconnected in that space and not allowing like left right brain interaction. That
yeah.
you do need to get out in the woods. You need to get out and think about what you eat. I'm a cancer
Yeah.
survivor, and I
Oh,
had to
yeah.
start thinking about at 27, and then
Oh,
my
my.
daughter is big time. I'm 57 now. I survived it, but
Uh-huh.
the idea is like we've always gone into more organic. We do our own growing, our own
Mhm.
vegetables, like our own horticulture that we do,
Oh, cool.
and just understanding, the connection between the body, what you eat, being out in the wilderness, or just out in nature. And sometimes, like you just have to. Yeah, I think with Western world, we can get out of balance,
Oh,
and you
absolutely.
can bring in things from indigenous and Eastern cultures. I think it helps to get you from being like discordant or dissonant or in the noise. It gets you,
Right.
back into harmony.
Right. Well, and like for me, it's a reminder, a very important one, that we're all part of something much larger than ourselves. So when you're in the office or in your head or doing the tech, it's like the world starts to shrink, 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 shrink. Even if you're working on like some sort of global technology, but you get yourself back out into nature, it's just like this humbling rebalancing, get in the body, but it's also like, it's just awesome. That it's constant reminders, whether it's a sunset or just looking at these repeated patterns and natural elements. It's like, it's sort of like in mindfulness where we pull back. We're not our thoughts. We observe the thoughts, and nature for me reminds me to kind of pull back. And I think in doing that, that's what allows the creative self to
Yeah,
surface.
it's
Um,
kind of like the 50,000 foot view versus being too close to it. And they're also
exactly.
the restorative thing, like go out, take your sandals off, take your socks off, and have your feet actually touch the earth, touch the
Yeah.
Gaia. It's kind
Oh
of
yeah.
very, if you actually go out for a walk in the woods, it's kind of like a Victorian poet said, nature
Mhm.
is the cathedral, right?
Right.
So it's like it's very restorative if you let it be. Like if you go out
Mhm.
there with your Walkman on, you're not really,
Right.
you're not listening
You're,
to the to
when
this
you're or if
to
you're in
the
your like motor driven device, like
yeah, you're driving through like with an electric
powered
bicycle
skateboard.
instead of like actually walking or
Right.
maybe you don't feel that as much. But to me that's the it's as necessary for us to be out there getting our vitamin D, to be getting the fresh air, be out in in the woods or on the lake or in the river. To me that is why I just I think you're just any kind of melancholy tends
Mhm.
to like get washed right out.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, for your listeners, and I'm not sure if you know as well, but we've talked about some of my publications and some of the things that I offer through the lens of art therapy. But as a visual artist, I'm a nature-based artist, so I do site-specific temporary works in nature. And I have a body of work called Girl in the Woods, which follows the story arc of the hero's journey. And so there's a central character. I've done 6 versions of her, basically from the time she's a girl and she grows into a young woman, and they turn into these life-size sculptures. I have like a gown made out of prickly pear cactus skeleton, and just other all found objects. And so I love combining creativity and nature when working with people, because, and I think within the context of our conversation, I would assume a lot of your listeners are creative. So we're sort of preaching to the
Yeah,
choir. But, there is always the question, like, does art-based mindfulness work for me if I don't paint or draw? So I give myself permission to be creative, but what if cooking is my creativity?
yeah,
Can this still work? Nature is the great reminder that we can all be creative. And so we do things like flower petal mandalas, just touching the earth, and the color, appreciating the color and texture of flower petals, and just basically arranging, in like cool patterns. Like one technique is called living art journal, and you simply um, gather a few materials that you feel drawn to that day and just writing a poem or taking a photograph of it and returning it to the earth. Like there are these very simple, peaceful processes that can be incredibly depthful. And you don't need to paint or draw or,
oh
be
yeah.
that
Not
visual with
everybody's
it.
gonna be a painter or
Yeah.
a musician or like an author or poet, but there's many ways to be artistic. Like just we're all creative. We all tell stories.
Mhm.
I always point out like everybody tells a story when they go out and when they talk.
Yep.
When within your microcosm of your people that you are very close to you to the people that you work with, every day you're telling a story. You're framing like
Right.
your world, and humans are very creative in how they do that.
Mhm.
You know, and so like every day you're creative, and from the minute you get up, you make choices,
Right.
and so you start to believe that you're making these little wins, or that you are creative
Mhm.
in your life.
Right.
Then it gives you like the permission structure to realize, you don't have to be. Van Gogh or something, but you could do more than what you expect. That you could try something that maybe you don't think is your wheelhouse, but
Yeah.
you'll probably find it if you go find that inner child
Right.
and then give yourself permission to like not be perfect. Because I think perfection, I always point out to most people, perfection is like the enemy of an art, creativity. It's
Hmm.
like a lot of times it's like the imperfect things are the things that actually are worthwhile.
Right. And the whole happy accident thing is a whole other
Yeah,
conversation.
that's my big
Um,
wheelhouse is a happy accident.
yeah, yeah. Um, I love to ask people, like, if your life were a work of art, would you be happy? Like, would you like the image that you see? Would it strike a harmonious chord, or is it out of tune? And are you okay with that? And to remind people that you're the creator of your own life. And, to become more intentional means that you're defining for yourself what goes into that picture or into that song, and not letting someone else to the same extent write that for you. You don't have to dance someone else's choreography. To some extent, we do those things, but when people pause and think of their lives as a masterpiece, a lot of people are going through the motions, not remembering that they get to call some of the shots.
Yeah,
And
that's your like you own your destiny. You can't own what happened yesterday.
right,
Can't open, but you can own what goes on. And
right.
so from that, like being a cancer survivor, I kind of took that to heart.
Mm,
That there's this kind of pivotal moment that happens when you have these crucible moments. I've met a lot of people on the show, on the podcast. You do a podcast too. We'll talk about that.
yeah, yeah.
But the idea is like when you get the crucible moment and then you realize that I actually, won. I won
Hmm.
against cancer. So then why am I scared of this? That's why I went to Japan.
Right.
It's like, I wouldn't have gone to Japan pre-cancer. Post-cancer, I said, why not?
Yeah. Wow.
Post-cancer, like I decided to front a band and actually go to New York and play in front of people. And
Hmm.
before cancer, I wouldn't have thought to do that. I would have been scared to do that. But
Yeah.
there's a point where like you give yourself that permission to
Mm,
go and maybe you fail forward. You
right.
learn from your mistakes. You learn from different things. You do a podcast, right? Your first two episodes are probably not where you are after 10 or 50 or 100, but you got to start somewhere.
Right. Right. Permission is such that's really, I don't know what the word is, beautiful, powerful, humbling. um that cancer taught you those lessons, and it was how powerful for you to give yourself permission to do these things that hold you back. And it makes me think of courage, and like, what is the definition of courage, and where did courage layer into this? For you, there was a confidence that you fought this battle, so these other things are probably easy because it's just like a mental vulnerability.
Yeah.
um, and like, I tend to think of courage not so much as a fight or a muscle to build up, but by, again, from the mindfulness perspective, learning what beliefs. I think of courage as like a hot air balloon. Like, if you're called to be a musician in a band, like, but you have these beliefs that maybe hold you back from putting yourself in front of the audience. um, I think of courage as a hot air balloon that's tethered to your true self essence, and it just wants to rise. Like, you're just meant to
Yeah.
do these things.
Right.
But
Right.
it's our narratives, it's our limiting beliefs, it's our fears that are like tethers that hold it to the ground. So you can use your creativity and mindfulness to identify these things, and it's like snip, snip, it cuts these tethers, and courage then just happens, and you move forward and do these things. And so, for what that's worth, I just wanted to share that sounds like what happened for you, that the challenges you overcame in surviving cancer gave you the tools, resources, and insight to cut those tethers so that your balloon could rise in all these other areas of your life. And that's incredible.
Yeah, I think sometimes you have to lean into the thing that you're scared of, right? I think
Yeah,
fear
yeah.
and safety and shame are a lot of things. And I ran into people in cancer, when I was in my cancer treatment, there were other cancer patients and they were feeling like shame because
Mm,
they were feeling fear. They scared. And what I found is like in the strength of like, I don't want to be in that place. I saw people
mhm.
around me. I was like, being so fearful of it, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to look at it as an opportunity that this is like
Mhm.
teaching me something. And
Yeah.
like I feel like it could take me, or I'm going to beat it. I'm going to kick it. If I
Mhm.
kick it, then I'm going to do this. I'm gonna go, and I'm starting to make plans. And I said, like, if I kick this, I'm gonna go do that, and I'm gonna actually honor that, and I'm gonna do it. And so that, yeah, you start making a contract with yourself
Yeah.
to like
Well,
do stuff.
like in the story arc of the hero's journey, there's this call, and then so I don't know if the call was something prior or if it was the cancer. Cancer is sort of the enemy, but it's like you answered that call by going deeper, like by facing these fears and things that held a lot of other people back. And then so then you had these incredible things that happened as a result to answering that call. um, and then at what point did you start the podcast?
Well, I started the podcast like in 2016.
Okay.
So, but I had started my band back in like 2008. And before that,
Oh.
one of the first things I did when I had the cancer was I actually I bought a mountain bike frame when I was, and I ordered it, and I built the bike piece by piece. And by the time I was out of my rehabilitation, I actually started going to the trail and
Mm.
getting myself back in shape. And so I would go ride, like half a mile, and say, "Hey, I won. I got a half a mile." And then I
Mhm.
go like a mile, and then I go 2 miles. And then when I was able to get to like 5 miles, I started riding with a group of guys again after I knew
Mhm.
I could do 5, and then I started riding with another group of
Yeah.
guys when I could get to 10. So I gave myself a goal to kind of build this bike, and this new bike was gonna be my kind of my gift to myself. I'm gonna have this cool new bike to go on the trail and restore
Oh,
myself. So I
it was
did that,
so.
and then
Yeah.
I started reading poetry at these clubs in Northampton, Mass, and
Oh,
I
cool.
hadn't done that before. And so that was like
Mhm.
the first thing I did was doing that, was
Yeah.
outside of getting the bike.
I love how those two things go together. One, the poetry was like being seen and heard, like the voice piece. But the bike was like this vision, this hope, like this movement. And I think in any sort of healing or recovery, like there has to be hope. There has to be like this outcome destination and this vision of getting this bike together. I can just see how powerful that is, what that would have been,
I still
and
have that bike.
pulling you through it. That's so cool. What color is it? Just out
Well,
of
it's
curiosity.
actually like, machined aluminum, so it's, like, very
Okay.
shiny machined aluminum. It was custom built with, like, an Italian front fork, and it's got, like, all custom parts. I was doing good financially even when I was in cancer 'cause I was a software
Mhm.
guy, and I just, like, said, "I'm not gonna be down on my." People are saying, "Oh, you're never gonna be able." I might not be able to walk again, right? And I was like, "I'm
Mhm.
gonna go mountain bike again."
Yeah.
And I
Your
was telling
your
people, it's like,
mind, you needed that. That's
it's like, hey,
amazing.
it's like, we gotta say people, and I know my mom was like, "You shouldn't go back on the mountain." I was like, "I am going back on the mountain." So
Mhm.
that was like it's the people around me said, "Well, you just had my cancer was on my back. I had a sarcoma
Oh,
on my back,
okay.
and I was not." The people were thinking I would not be able to walk, and I was able to come back and actually go to like Mount Snow and
Mhm.
Killington and do a lot of heavy mountain bike. I even thought about racing. By the time I
Okay.
was actually doing pretty good, I was getting, making runs down the mountain that were like competitive. So I
Yeah.
was starting to like, so it's just like where you can go is a lot of it's in your head. Yeah.
Absolutely. You were like 10Xing yourself that whole time.
Yeah. It's like you have to really, the mind has a lot of power.
Yes, it
And
does.
and I saw people that went the other way. That didn't want to get out of the house.
Right.
And I had to go and, tried to help some people and get them to like see that you could do it better, you know,
Mhm.
that you could like, you could go and have this story. So when I would do my poetry, I would kind of speak to it and
Okay.
try to inspire people that were in that kind of scenario to
Mhm.
realize that you could do something different
Right.
than being like scared of the world.
Right. That's awesome. Do you still, speak with, to people who have cancer or Is
Well,
do
I try to
do
get the
podcasts?
story out, to
Mhm.
different groups. My daughter works with a disability group,
Okay.
because she has some disabilities, and she's an artist that kind of focus that, and I kind of
Yeah.
work with them to help
Mhm.
them, with their like, I help do like, I'm gonna be into like, she's got this whole new group of, disabled artists, and she has these virtual galleries, and I'm gonna be,
Oh,
like,
wow.
helping to, like, interview each artist. It's
Mhm.
part of this program that she does, and I'm signed up for this year to actually help, kinda help with the publicity for her art project by giving, like, interviews of the specifically for her project called Art and Mind, and I'm gonna be doing, like, the podcast interviews on her platform, but
Awesome.
yeah, I like to try to we all work as a bunch of my wife's a playwright, my daughter's an artist, and I do
Okay.
what I do. We try to be a creative family together.
That's beautiful. Good for you guys.
Because there are people don't I think a lot of people put down the art, they act like it's not a good day job, or they act like
Mm.
it's not a real job, or it's not something that you should aspire to be like an accountant or or a lawyer or something, like, get something, like, that's more, like, understandable to certain people, but it's like,
Mhm.
I mean, the arts to me are, like, everything.
Yeah, well, to someone who is truly a creative, like, if you're not making your living at it, it's still like it's like breathing. If you can do your other thing, you don't have to make a living at it. You can do your other thing, and then you can do a creative thing for 5 minutes, and it's like your exhale.
Yeah.
It's just the thing that reconnects and just lets everything else flow off. So I hope that people listening can give themselves permission, even to do something small, even just a
I
few
just
minutes.
think it helps with, like, struggles, like, if you have personal struggles, if you look at art therapy and
Mhm.
different whatever you can find out how to do it, like, from the doodles to, like,
Mhm.
yoga,
Right.
and the different ways that you described what you do. Now,
Yeah.
you also have a podcast, the I Rose podcast, so what do you do on your podcast?
So I talk about all things creativity and all things related to creativity and empowerment. So
Mm,
I just started the podcast in January. So I have a number of episodes that are really focused on different types of creative blocks and how to move through those. Um, and I have a number of episodes that deal with specific things like you combining creativity to process grief or to overcome overwhelm. And so I do a combination of sharing a little bit about my own studio practice, my own blocks, so there's a lot of transparency and personal story. I also share case studies so people can really get a sense of all of the different ways that you can do incredibly unique projects that, depending on what you're working on and what your affinity is, creatively speaking. And then each episode ends with an art prompt related to the topic of that day, with some journal prompts. So there's just a lot of information, practical strategies, um, insight building stories to bring this. Otherwise, it sounds like really conceptual stuff if you haven't gone through the
yeah.
process of this before. So that brings it to life and makes it a little more comfortable, I hope, for people to put their toe in the water and try some techniques for themselves. So again, it's entry level for any type of creative of any level of ability. And people can, with the art prompts, they can just be journal prompts as well, for reflection. So it comes out every week and it's available on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts and on my website, which is jodirosestudio.com.
Yep. And so, we have that website there. I just had a
Yeah.
question for you, like, when you got into the podcast form, what do you like about the space of podcasting or the actual form of it? You know, what was appealing to you about the podcast
Well, I
itself?
really love creating the content. I love writing the episodes. I love for myself that I think that the episodes are building to some larger thing. But I really enjoy storytelling. And people for the longest time, art therapy is getting better, well known now, but people would be like, oh, art therapy? You're an art therapist? Like, what is that? And so you can explain to people while you process your emotions or you do all these different things using
Mhm.
creative practices. and then you get sort of this blank stare. And
Yeah.
so people don't, like, unless they've experienced it, they don't realize the depth, insight, or the energetic or emotional release that can come from the simplest of prompts. So I love podcasting as a form of storytelling so that people can understand that process and relate it to their own lives and maybe give themselves permission to try it. And I think podcasting is unique. So I only do audio, or yeah, I
Audio.
only do audio. I don't do video. So I think it's really interesting to talk about what people created, to describe it, or to
Yeah.
talk about what
In
I did.
audio
So
form.
then people can't compare their work to this person. Because if I did video, people might say, "Oh wow, that's a really neat idea, but I could never do that collage
Yeah.
thing that
Yeah.
way." But they can imagine it and not see it. So for me, that's really fun. And I just love the feedback that I get. I find that when people get into the episodes and then they listen to a couple and they really love to listen to every episode, it's like their weekly thing to get the art prompt of that week. And so just getting the positive feedback just means the world to me. So um,
That's interesting you mentioned about audio because when I first started podcasting in 2016, it was all audio. It wasn't
right.
until like 2020 where the video became
Yeah.
like something that we could do. And most of my shows, the majority of the distribution is still audio only.
Hmm.
It's like four. Every episode is like four spaces. Every episode's like video, like on
Yeah.
YouTube and
Yeah.
Facebook and Indeed and LinkedIn. But like in most of the spaces like Apple Podcast and iHeartRadio, Amazon, they're all audio. So
Right.
it's kind of like the radio. I mean, I grew up, my parents grew up more listening to radio broadcast.
Hmm.
I was very much when I was in the 70s, we did listen to like they still had some radio programs on, and my parents liked those, and we used to
Hmm.
listen to
Hmm.
them. And I think there's something about the uh, audio experience, and being a musician, we get it. Like the audio experience is in itself creates like sound painting or sound visuals that you get from audio only that you kind of own. It's like when you read a book. A reader reads the book, they get this picture and a very cinematic picture
Exactly.
from the book.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing happens when you listen to something that's audio only, then you get to interpret it, you know.
Absolutely, and I just find that writing the episodes is really fun. So I haven't built up to interviewing anyone yet. It's all original, like, content and me.
That, yeah.
It's just me. So one day we'll get to doing interviews and case studies that way. But in the audio only, like, I find that I will listen to recordings before I do like my final recording while I'm driving, while I'm walking around the treadmill.
Mhm.
Because it's like if there's a spot that's flat or boring, if it's boring to me, it's going to be boring to everyone else. And so it's like a way to up level it. Where I think with video, it's easy because you're like, oh, look at his glasses. Like, what's going on in his room? Like, it's easy to be distracted,
Yeah, yeah,
and yet
yeah.
the whole thing can be like this monotone sort of presentation. And so I think that audio really is more challenging to put together something really unique and special. And I'm saying that like at some point I might get to video as well, but one step at a time. We start somewhere and go from there. So yeah.
But it's cool to be in different spaces, you do I've talked to filmmakers and painters and people who do visual arts, and it's always interesting to like how people kind of frame what they're doing and like
Mhm.
what they're are they actually mapping it out ahead of time or kind of
Mhm.
flow state doing it, and sometimes it's like
Right.
a mixture of all of it. So
Mhm.
I've talked to filmmakers, they storyboard everything out, but they still allow that happy accident to happen. If it does, they might
Right.
not throw it away.
Yeah.
They actually might it might inform them to change what they were doing. And
Mhm.
I've always been very interested in people like you have a plan, you go with the plan, and then suddenly the impromptu thing is better than the plan. Are you willing to change your
Right.
plan?
Right. Right.
So that's always like sometimes you have that overhead, like even in IT, sometimes like in software design, we might have a project plan, but then we get a happy accident. and the happy accident is better than what we were going to do. But then we have to go fight for
Right.
this new idea.
There's
We
this
have to
whole
go
other.
we have to be like advocates for this new idea, and
Mhm.
we have to like argue it. But it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes you get passionate enough about it that it's like, yeah, this is like not on the plan, but it should be on the plan.
Right. Well, and isn't it, I'm always interested, like, when and why happy accidents let themselves be known at the time that they do. Like, I think a lot of times it's just like these ideas, they're ready to come into the world, and it doesn't, like, if you haven't, it hasn't come out yet, or you haven't picked up on its clues, it's just gonna there it
Yeah,
is.
just
And then it's like
yeah,
you're forced in this case to advocate for it because it's like it must be. It must be. But that, even if that's not what the team strategized 6 months ago, and
yeah, but
so,
you fight for it because then you get passionate about it. Because sometimes that
yeah.
thing is just like that napkin thing.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh yeah, the
when you're
napkin
sitting in a
thing.
restaurant and it's like, oh, this is the idea, and there's tons of ideas that come from people like doing like you said, like the doodling. Like,
Mhm.
a lot of ideas come from people doing like voice memos, doodles, waking up in the middle of the night, jumping on the piano, hitting the
Right.
record. And like sometimes it just comes and it's like all the way there. I mean, the weird about the
Mhm.
creative process. Sometimes I agonize and write every note in the
Mhm.
tablature, write it down, and then sometimes it's like something just comes and it's way better than that, or
Right.
sometimes it's not. But sometimes like the thing that comes off the cuff, like comes out of a dream, like the whole thing just comes to
Mhm.
you and it's like, wow, that's like
Yeah.
it's like somebody just downloaded that. I just
Right.
downloaded something from the universe, and it's like
Yeah.
it's hard to just think. It's like you could try to act like you really heavily composed it, but it's like no, it just
Yeah.
kind of came to me.
Yeah, it's interesting, like, when I write my episodes, like, that's probably the most structured creative thing that I do, like, writing. Um, but, like, I think everywhere else in my creative process, I really think of myself more as a conduit, and I do everything I can to stay out of the way of myself and to
Yeah,
shut my head down and, like, put the ego aside. And some of the art therapy techniques, like in Doodle's Code, I teach the dialoguing technique in my studio practice with, like, my formal artworks. I dialogue with my artworks, and I go where it wants me to go. So I just wrote an episode today about the last large sculpture that I did. I had imagined it being like this sculptural ball gown, and that is not where the piece wanted to go. But if I had forced it, like, no, I
yeah,
want
of
this to
course, yeah,
be this, like, oh my gosh, it would just be terrible. So I've just learned to, like, just let it go where it needs to and let it tell the story that it needs to. The piece is stronger, and it's just a whole lot more fun
yeah. I think
creation.
that's something people kind of come into because
Yeah.
I've run into artists when they're like, no, you go and work on something and say the baseline will be this. So
Mhm.
oh, there's no room. It's like, no, there's no room. You
Mhm.
gotta do exactly okay. But some you get to other people are like, oh, they're willing to entertain that maybe
Mhm.
you can bring something else, right? So
Yeah.
some people are very wedded to their original idea, and other
Right.
people are more collaborative
Right.
or were willing to let that download happen.
Right.
Then
But
some
still have structure. You can
yeah.
still have structure, and so I find, depending on what I'm working on, that formula of structure and flow changes.
Yeah, it's kind of whatever's I would say whatever serves the piece. Some pieces
I like
there's
that.
like some pieces are like there's a famous story like Bruce Springsteen wrote like Born to Run took him 6 months,
Mhm.
and he kind of band was felt tortured because they had to keep on doing the song for 6 months straight.
Uh-huh.
Kept on changing it, kept on changing it, kept on changing it. Now, he did Nebraska, he did that like on a 4-track Tascam in a hotel.
Mhm.
Hardly any
Mhm.
overdubs, like first, second take. So
Right.
some projects come to you like that, like they
Yeah.
didn't even professionally just left it on a portable recorder and sent it out to the world like that. Didn't really get it
Yeah.
polished because he felt like, well, that is what I want. But
Mhm.
this song deserves 6 months of torture.
Right.
This one was more stream of consciousness. Well, it kind
Mhm.
of depends on what the project deserved, in your mind. Like this project, it should be like this,
Yeah.
it should be like that.
Absolutely.
So there's no general. People always want to know what's the rule. Well, sometimes the
Right.
rule changes.
Right, exactly. It's just like anything in life, or like I keep going back to mindfulness. Like as soon as you think you understand the rules and the rules change. We said that about our technology when we were
Yeah,
logging onto this about like the settings. It's like, oh, as soon as you think you know it, then you don't. It
yeah.
shifts. Um,
We're in a paradigm shift today. We're in the age of robotics and AI, and people are scared of the tech. But I always feel like the machine is always subordinate to the human,
hmm,
and it's always meant to be a tool. It's not meant to rule me or
mm-hmm.
rule you. And we got some people who think it's like it's going to rule us. And it's like, but no, you shouldn't ever get to the mindset where the machine's going to rule you.
Right. Well, and I also like to remember that, when 75 years ago, when certain technology, it was like as earth mind blowing then, where technology was at, is some of the things that are coming out now. It's just a different generation that is obviously more advanced. But sometimes I remind if I start to get afraid of the technology, like I just remind myself to be humbled
Yeah,
that
but
every
it's still good.
generation has
The
had it
human
figured.
brain is
Yeah,
still a more complex computer than any computer that's ever been built, including all these AI
yeah.
devices. They're still not anywhere near what we can do. Um, so people are maybe kind of think that it's actually more advanced than it actually is.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so like I would always remind people like even though it looks amazing what it can do, it's still not sentient. It still
Right.
is basically repackaging stuff that it learned. So
Mhm.
it's just taking things and it's very convincing that it seems to be original, but it's really an amalgamation of everything it learned. It's
Right,
so
and in the best of sense too, it can help us as human beings elevate our own work.
yeah, you use
Yeah.
it as a tool, you use it as a way to
Mhm.
elevate, to get things done that are tedious, things that were too complex to do, take too much time, but never like just substitute your own human originality
Right.
for a clone or a copy of somebody else's work.
Right. Right.
But that's my kind of 2 cents there. But I want to thank you for being on the show. We always end up going hitting the hour before we ever imagine it. We hit
Mhm.
the hour,
Yeah.
and I do appreciate the time you took to be here today.
You are most welcome. Thank you so much for the fun and interesting conversation. I hope that your listeners enjoyed it. And I hope to stay connected and hear from your listeners as well. So I welcome everyone to reach out. And
Well,
thank you again.
thank you. We love to have people come back if they have a new book or a new thing that they're doing, and we have people come back for a repeat episode. So,
Okay.
that's always on the table. I want to thank you
All right.
again for being here. We do have your JodiRoadStudio.com link, and that will be clickable. We do encourage people to click those links
Yeah.
and
Wonderful.
check it out. And we were just live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We will be on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Video Podcast, iHeartRadio, Amazon Podcast, many other channels by tomorrow.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all that you do to share these incredible conversations about creativity around the globe. That's awesome work and lovely to meet you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Have a great night.
You as well.